Hey, happy Wednesday, everyone. I hope you're having a lovely day. I am sending warm hugs and hopefully some warm air to my friends in Texas who are freezing and still without power. My dad is one of those. So my heart goes out to my Texas friends and Texas family who are still struggling with super cold weather down there. But that's not what I want to talk about today. Today, I wanted to go live to talk about anxiety. And why do I want to talk about anxiety? Because it is something that I see posts about from people constantly about anxiety. I know anxiety is a huge, huge problem with teens these days. I've had my own bouts with anxiety. And unfortunately, what we're kind of taught to do about anxiety is to push it down, numb it. There's anti-anxiety medications like Xanax and Valium and whatnot, and we're supposed to use that to get over the anxiety. But what if we actually just dealt with what the anxiety is and where it is coming from, right? So in the most simplest terms of the word, the most simplest terms, anxiety is basically caused by your brain projecting yourself into the future, into a future that does not yet exist, and creating all kinds of scenarios that are realistically very unlikely to happen. And then your brain goes crazy into loops trying to solve for these scenarios, right? So let me just give you an example. Something that I dealt with in the past when I was starting my business and a ramp-up period was slow and whatnot. I had a lot of anxiety that because I had quit my job. I went all in my business. I quit my job and I was living off my savings. So I had this anxiety that I was going to run out of savings. My home was going to get foreclosed on. My car was going to get repossessed. I was going to end up living under a bridge in a tent with my dogs. And then I was going to meet my demise by some guy breaking into my tent and raping and strangling me to death, right? So my brain just invented this incredible disastrous scenario based on just being early on starting my business and not having yet enough clients where I could support myself, right? So my brain took, okay, I'm starting a business and I've quit my job, to I'm, being strangled and raped and murdered under a bridge in downtown Charlotte, right? The likelihood, there's so much between the actual real scenario and the imagined worst outcome. There's so much that could ever happen. Even if I had at that point in my life, never gotten any clients, no one wanted to work with me. There's so much I could do before I ended up under a bridge being strangled and murdered, right? But our brain, it's the reptilian part of our brain, that fight or flight, that instinct, kind of keep you safe brain. It wants to take you straight to the worst case scenario. And then the rational part of your brain says, okay, now what are we going to do now that we're in this worst case scenario? And so what happens is, we end up going to anxiety, right? We have stress, our heart beats faster, our breathing's shallow, we're freaking out, but there's actually not a real scenario to freak out about. It's something completely imagined in the brain. And so that is where anxiety comes from. And I know in the moment you're okay, in the moment it feels so real. It feels like you are seconds from being under that bridge and the rapist is waiting for nightfall, right? It feels you're seconds away from that and that you must solve this problem right now. But that's actually not what's happening, and it's so far away. So, the way to take control of that and that anxiety and that runaway brain telling these crazy, disastrous stories, there's techniques we can use for that. But what you must understand is that our brains evolved based on being cavemen thousands of years ago, when there were tigers or wild animals that could maul us in a second, right? Instantly. We could go from happily picking berries to being mauled by a bear in a heartbeat. That's the evolution. Our brain is still there, right? So our brain is constantly looking for dangers that could kill you, because back where our brain is still, hasn't caught up with modern life, that was actually a really, really real scenario that could happen. Like you could just be killed by a wild animal, or something really bad could happen to you in a moment's notice that you wouldn't have had time to plan for. So your brain, when you're anxious or you have anxiety, it's not because there's actually something wrong with your brain. And I know that the medical community will tell you something completely different, that you need their prescription pills so that you don't feel that way. But that's not the case. Actually, your brain is doing exactly what it evolved to do. Unfortunately, evolution is slow, and the pace of modern society, the industrialization and the rise of computers and obviously internet and everything, right? Like has come so fast that our human bodies and human brains have not caught up with evolving to a state where there's really not these present dangers at every turn. So our brain freaks out on that, right? It freaks out and it brings us to this like real and present danger when there's really not one. It's completely invented. So the way to kind of like loosen the grip that anxiety has on you is, for one, just stop and take a deep breath. When you are going down this, like, again, living under the bridge, the rapist is there, his hands are on your throat. Like when your brain's going down that, first you just stop and take a breath, and you realize, okay, no one has their hands on my throat right now. I'm actually sitting in my office in front of my computer in this particular second, in this 1 second in which I'm here, everything is actually okay. Even if you do owe $1 million in bills and all this other stuff, in this moment, where you were sitting, you are okay, right? You're not under the bridge, and no one's pulling you under the bridge in a second. And so you take that breath and get into the second that you're in. You get present. Okay, here I am. Like, I'm not under the bridge, okay? The other thing, your brain will keep, like, running these loops until you let it process all that. The best way to process it is just to get a simple notebook, piece of blank paper, a napkin, like whatever, a back of a junk envelope, whatever you have, and a pen or a pencil, and just write everything down that your brain is telling you. Don't judge it. Don't say this is stupid. Like, let it tell you, oh my gosh, I'm not sure how I'm going to pay my bills. My bank account might be empty. I'm going to be living under, like, let it run through the whole scenario, which it's going to run through this whole long show. And at the end is, and then you die, right? Let it run through all of that on paper. Get it out of your brain. Every thought, don't judge it. Don't stop it. No, you're not going to like have to read this later. No one's going to like tell you to make a video and read it later. Like literally you're just writing it down to get it out of your brain. Okay. Once it's completely out of your brain, every last thought, even if it's ridiculous, like me writing about the murderer's got his hands around my throat, like, and then he's like killing my dog and eating it, right? Like, it doesn't matter. Like, let your brain take it to the nth degree and write it all down, every word of it. And don't just say, well, I let it do it in my head. You can't let it do it in your head because it's not getting out of your head. Like, you literally have to do it on a piece of paper. Again, do not worry if your handwriting is terrible and you will not be able to read it later. My handwriting is atrocious. It's atrocious. It doesn't matter. Write it all down. And when you're completely out of disaster thoughts and the paper's full, maybe you filled a whole notebook, okay? Whatever it is, you might have been storing these for a while. It's fine, okay? Totally fine. Then you take a deep breath and you're going to notice that you already feel a lot better. Like the anxiety is already, like, its little claws are no longer in you. Now the claws are like, okay, the grip has been loosened. And then if you'd like to, you don't have to, you can skim back through what you wrote down. And don't worry if half of it you can't read and you're like, did I say this or that? It doesn't matter. Just skim back through what you wrote. And then, like, objectively look at how realistic or how ridiculous it sounds when you're reading it and thinking about where you are sitting right at this particular moment, right? And it's okay to laugh at yourself. Like, again, I didn't say you're going to have to show this to anyone or share it on the internet. Like, literally, this is just for you. and you're like, oh my gosh, I really put that the murderer was going to rape me and murder me under the bridge, and then they were going to eat my dogs. Like, how likely is that to happen? Like, really? Like, I love my dogs, and that would be horrible if it happened, but like, that's really not likely that all this stuff is going to happen, right? Like, you can then see it objectively for what it is, which is your brain acting like a brain that is, hasn't evolved that much over the last several thousand years, right? The human brain, and that's okay. And then you realize that nothing has gone wrong. Nothing has gone wrong. Your brain just did what it evolved to do through evolution, and it tried to like solve for a scenario that actually is incredibly unlikely to happen. All right, once you skim back through the trauma that you've written out on your page, starting from, not being able to pay all your bills, your house getting repoed, like start to say, okay, now what would I do if this happened? Like, okay, what would I do if my bank account was literally at zero? Or it was approaching zero? Like, could I get a job waiting tables? Could I drive Uber? Could I ask the neighbors if I could mow their yard for $20? Like, there's a lot of things that you could actually take action on, like if you were in that scenario, right? Could you call, and make some special payment arrangements with the bank? Could you, work 3 fast food jobs and could you sell your house and move into a cheaper place to live while you work these 3 fast food jobs? Like, seriously, like solve for each of those things. That just seems like a disaster. Like, and then you start to realize, wow, I'm a long way from like being raped and murdered, living in a tent in downtown, right? Like, there's a lot I could do before I ever ended up in a tent. Like, I could move back to Texas and live with one of my siblings. I could ask the neighbor if I could crash at their place until I got back on my feet. Like there's a lot you could do before you're in your doomsday scenario. And then once you do that, like I already told you that, like just writing it down, like the claws that the anxiety has in you, like claws, they're already like loosening up, right? And now as you start writing, you start solving for these various scenarios, these various points before you get to being raped and murdered under the bridge, like you're solving for those, then the little anxiety monster like starts to back off, right? Now he went from claws to like, okay, I'm still hovering over you, but my claws are not in you, to stepping off, right? Stepping back, right? Then he's away from you. Then you're breathing. You're realizing like there is really no threat here. I have lots of options. It's okay, right? It's okay. And then the anxieties, it's okay, right? It's okay. You didn't have to go get a drink. You didn't have to take 12 Xanax. You didn't have to, I don't know, do what other things people do that are bad for them. You didn't have to eat like an entire birthday cake. Like, you didn't have to do any of that. Like, you've processed it and you've realized that nothing has gone wrong and it's okay, right? And then the next time you get anxious, you do this process again. Like, the more you do it, the less you actually get anxious, because you realize like, oh, here's my brain coming up with a doomsday scenario again. Okay, all right, I'm gonna entertain it. Just kind of like, then you start to look at it like as if your brain is like, have you ever had like a little kid who's like really, really, really excited to show you something? And then they're like, hey, let me play my record. Let me play Mary Had a Little Lamb on my recorder for you, right? And you're like, oh, okay, cool. And they play their little Mary Had a Little Lamb thing, right? And they play it on their recorder. And you're like, great. Oh, that's so awesome. Thank you, right? And then they go away. And then like 5 minutes later, they want to play it again. And then they want to play it again. And then they want to play it again. And they're really cute. And they're your cousin or your niece, your nephew, and you love them. But you really don't want to hear Mary Had a Little Lamb on the recorder anymore, right? You're just like, I love you. You're so sweet. I really appreciate you playing music for me. But right now, I just want to read my book, right? Like, then you start to realize that your brain is like that cute little cousin or nephew that wants to play Mary Had a Little Lamb on the recorder. And that's, the anxiety thing. And you're just like, okay, it's cool, right? And you learn like, okay, there it is. It's just Just the Mary Had a Little Lamb kid again. It's all good. And so the more that you practice this simple thing, the anxiety will no longer like dig its claws into you again. Like it starts to sneak up on you and you're like, hey, I know who you are. It's cool. No claws today, right? We're good. I don't need the claws. We're good. Go put the claws in somebody else. Like we're good today, right? We're good. And then your brain will stop bombarding you with anxious thoughts constantly. I'm not going to tell you that your brain will never, ever have anxious thoughts ever again. Like, I wish I could, right? But I can tell you that it will have, the more you do this process, like the way less that you will have those anxious thoughts. And then when you'll get to a point where you don't even notice them anymore. You don't even call it anxiety. You're like, oh, my brain's just doing that thing. Mary Had a Little Lamb, right? It's all good. It's just the Mary Had a Little Lamb thing again. Okay, it's good, right? Like it's no longer a problem. It's not this big monster that gets its claws into you and you got to drink a bottle of wine or take Xanax or anything for, right? Like it's really not anything that you have to run from because it's just thoughts. It's just your brain doing a primitive loop that it evolved to do to protect you thousands of years ago when there were all kinds of things roaming the earth that would eat you in a heartbeat. That's all it's doing, right? So once you recognize that and you can detach from it, then it's no longer you're saying, oh, my anxiety. It's not your anxiety. It's just an anxiety. It's just a thing it's just the Mary Had a Little Lamb thing your brain does, right? It's no longer anything that you have to like claim or you have to let claim you and dig its claws into you. It's just this thing. And you're like, oh, okay, time to write it down on a piece of paper. What do I have? Oh, I have this junk mail envelope. I'll just write on that. Or I got a notebook, whatever I have, right? Hey, let me grab a scratch piece of paper. Like, let me just let it do its Mary Had a Little Lamb and then let it go, right? And then you take control of your own brain. You take control. And anxiety is just, again, it's just that cute little kid that wants to play Mary Had a Little Lamb for the 100th time. And you're going to be like, hey, how about if I give you a candy bar instead? How about if you go show your other cousin that, right? Like, I love you. You're really, really cute, but I don't want to hear any music, right? It just becomes a thing. It's no longer a scary monster. It's no longer a thing that controls your life. It's just a thing that your brain does sometimes. And you just look at it just like a kid who wants to play Mary Had a Little Lamb over and over. And then eventually the kid gets bored of playing Mary Had a Little Lamb for you a million times and goes and plays it for someone else. And that's what your brain does. Like it gets bored of wanting to do that constantly. And so it stops. It stops harassing you and you get your life back. You don't have to surrender your life to anxiety or any other emotion. You can have your life back. It's really that simple. It just takes like a little bit of work. That's not even hard work. I mean, it's literally writing in a horrible chicken scratch if that's what you have. If you write in beautiful calligraphy, you can do that too. Write in chicken scratch like me, it's all good, right? That's all it is. It's all good, right? And the other thing I wanted to add on to this because this came up during one of my coaching sessions this morning with one of my teens, and she was talking about any of us who's a teenager or who has been a teenager at some point in their life knows how like middle school and high school, like especially middle school and high school, I'm not going to say it like never, it goes away completely from that there's just people that are just mean and hateful, right? They want to torture you. They want to bully you or they want to bully your friend. In the case of my young client, she was recounting something that happened a couple years ago where this kid really like bullied the crap out of her best friend and just really, really hateful things he was saying. And he was getting his little gang of buddies to join in saying all these hateful things and being really, really mean. And she had, some scenarios too where people were talking about her. And I just said, look, here's what you have to realize. And I said, I'm not this wise sage who like was born knowing this. Like I'm 44. Like I literally had to learn this in my 40s. People who are horribly mean to others, whether it's in middle school, high school, in your 20s, like whatever it is, whenever it is, it's never really about you. what it is this person looks at you as someone who is up here, right? They see themselves as someone who is down here. And they find that very threatening because they don't want to feel small and insignificant. And so they view you as a threat. And so for them to handle that, even though you're like, I don't even talk to them, I'm nice to everyone, it doesn't matter, right? They see you as this ideal that, and it's reminding them that they cannot live, in their mind, they cannot live up to this ideal, right? And so instead of them, there's two ways to do that when people admire someone and see them as an ideal. They can either learn from them or learn to raise themselves to that level. But unfortunately, what a lot of people do is they try to bully, harass, and be horribly mean to people who they view up here to tear them down and make them feel bad about themselves so that they're on equal footing with the person who's the bully, who was already feeling bad about themselves. But instead of handling it by handling their emotions, they're handling it by trying to tear down other people around them who they feel are above them. So whenever you have someone, and this goes for, any moms, any parents who, I've even heard of like mom on mom bullying, but I'm not going to get into who's bullying who, just like whatever scenario. But please, moms, if you're watching this with your, and you have young people that are struggling with bullying or struggling with not feeling good about themselves, and they're like, why is so-and-so so mean to me? Why are these people being ugly to me? Why are these people bullying me? I told my young person, I said, I know this sounds really messed up and it may be really hard for your brain to understand this or wrap your head around it right now, but look at them trying to tear you down by them deciding to, talk bad about you, whatever it is they're doing. In a weird way, it's a compliment because it is them showing that they think that you're above them. They think that you're awesome, and they want to tear down your awesomeness so that you will be not awesome with them. So when someone is ugly to you and mean to you and bullies you, it actually means you're awesome. And that other person feels very crappy and wants you to feel crappy with them. So I brought this up with my young person today, and it was just like seeing a light bulb go off on her eyes. It was just like, and it was this huge relief. It was awesome. And I know for myself, who I was bullied ruthlessly as a young person, I actually even had to change schools in the middle of my sophomore year because my life was actually in danger. That's how bad the bullying was. I wish I had known this then as that 15-year-old kid, because I could have handled it a lot differently. So I want to share this little nugget of wisdom, because I hope that it would, even if it just helps one person not go through what I did, that would just make it so worth it. But anyway, yeah. So when people are ugly to you, it is really, if you can wrap your brain around looking at it as a compliment, because they actually wish they were as cool as you, and it's just them trying to bring you down to their level, then that can really change your life, because it's actually really what it is. They think that you're really cool and they're not, and they want you to also feel not cool like them. It's much more productive to actually do the work on yourself so you also feel cool and you can meet them on the cool level, but unfortunately most people aren't that way. So I want to leave you with that. Also, I made a post about it yesterday that I'm doing free coaching for moms and teens right now. This is my way of giving back, my way of also helping with what's going on with all the stress that moms and teens are going through these days. I only have 6 spots available. I've already had a couple of moms with teens that are struggling reach out to me. So 4 of those spots, as soon as we nail down, one of the people's in Texas, so they have no power. So getting the appointment time knocked down, we're trying to figure out when they're going to have power again. So 4 of those spots are probably already about taken. So there's 2 spots left, mom and a teen. If this is something that interests you, please DM me and reach out so I can get you scheduled. Again, this is just This is going to be a free coaching session for you if you're a mom and for your teen. This is 30 minutes of coaching and to work on exactly the kind of mind management things that I just talked about. And this will not be followed by a sales pitch or any sort of offer to work with me. This is just pure coaching. And if you like the coaching and you want to explore what it looks like to work with me further, you can ask at the end of your appointment, and you can ask, and we can set up a completely separate time for a consultation where we'll discuss what you want to work on in a greater capacity. But this is literally just for the coaching. No sales pitches, no offers, nothing to be scared of. It's literally just coaching. So if you'd like to grab that last mom and teen spot, please DM me, because that probably won't last too long. And yeah, I hope this discussion on anxiety and kind of how to handle it was very useful for you. If it was useful for you, or you know someone else that it would be useful for, please share this video with them. And I send you lots of love and wishing you, wherever you are, that you stay safe and warm from the winter storms, and that you just have a wonderful rest of your Wednesday. Take care.